Okay, this is lecture number 22 in RPH 205, Introduction to Ethics. It's a class on what is health. All right, so what were the themes in the class? It starts out with all the dysfunction in our society right now, many different systems, the toxic culture, whatever. Then it has the Enlightenment. Um, what were the foundations that have led us to where we are, both positive and negative? Then the issue is we have to change the paradigm. We have to rethink everything. Instead of socialism versus capitalism, we have to rethink an entirely new green energy economy. We have to figure out a different way of providing our energy. We have to figure out a somewhat different way of living. We need a different food system. But day-to-day life is going to still be day-to-day life. People love their children. They have children. They go to school. They go to work. But in a context where they have an zero carbon use of energy. So visually, it might look a little different. Solar panels on your house, or I'm not sure exactly how much different it will look visually, but in terms of how we think and how our economic system works and how we think about all aspects of culture has to change radically. We have to think of ourselves as fundamentally interdependent. And the Enlightenment tried to get us to think of ourselves as fundamentally individual, and a number of other factors. So this lecture will start out. The topic is, how do social systems work in the systems paradigm? And then the healthcare systems, how they would work in the systems paradigm. It's a criticism of the Enlightenment view of social systems, including economic system and healthcare systems. So I'm going to start with a few quotes from Fritjof Capra's first chapter, his introduction, chapter 1, where he talks about the mechanistic worldview, just to remind you and to pick a few quotes that are very relevant to Mr. Capra's view of systems view of social systems and healthcare systems. So here's my here are the quotes from Capra that I wanted to highlight. Excuse me. Okay, so Capra is going to lay out a different model of social systems. Now, how did the Enlightenment do it? Well, the social scientists tried to gain respectability by adopting a Cartesian paradigm and the methods of Newtonian physics. But this is increasingly unrealistic, especially in economics. Before the 16th century, there was no isolation of economic phenomena from the fabric of life, right? So in Aristotle's view, the desire to live moderately and the effect of that on the economic system was a list of all of his virtues, right? You had his personal virtues, you had his social virtues, and then the political virtues. The first one was moderation. The desire for moderation is a personal virtue, and it plays out in the economic system. A justice as a personal virtue is the desire to live for the sake of something greater than yourself, and the desire to use your expertise for the benefit of the people who need it. And the reason those are in the political systems is we have to create laws that we have to act as citizens in order to know how to create an economic system and in order to know how to create a political system. So in Aristotle, there was no isolation of economic phenomena. So the main thing in economics is there's two kinds of household acquisition. In the household, you have to buy material stuff. There's two fundamentally different ways of exercising that activity. One of them is natural acquisition, where you buy what you need. Voila. That includes education, includes healthcare, includes music lessons and sports lessons. It's not just food, clothing, and shelter. In order to be human, you need a lot more than that. You need education, you need opportunities for engagement with other people. Oh, there are lots of things you need that the laws should be written to provide everyone with the opportunity to meet those needs. So there's natural acquisition to become a flourishing human being. Then there's unnatural acquisition, is that you want more than you need and you want more than other people have. So, so he's saying before that, we had a humanistic view of the economy and economic system. Whether it actually worked that way, right? The people in power tended to inherit their power, so they could become corrupt and the public wouldn't know it. But at least in theory, you have a theory through which you can call out the corruption. But a national system of markets is relatively recent. Now we have the market economy. So our economic system is based on private markets. And again, I said that was not the way it was in America. That has been a slow process of separating off the free markets from government and from government monitoring, not necessarily control, but monitoring. Then markets were based on barter. That's John Locke, and they were bound to be local. Okay, but it gradually increased, right? We have a money system and we have a national, international. With the scientific revolution and enlightenment, critical reasoning, empiricism, individualism became the dominant values. So I don't have to hopefully repeat that. That was Descartes as an individual, Locke, Bentham, even Mill, the higher pleasures is empathy. But I suppose that he really wanted to change the way we think about ourselves, but not Descartes and not Locke and not Bentham. Okay, so individualism became the dominant value together with a secular and materialistic orientation that led to the production of worldly goods and luxuries and the manipulative mentality of the industrial age. I don't think that's fair to the great ideas, but it's the way they're used. The new customs and activities resulted in the creation of new social and political institutions, and that gave rise to a new academic pursuit, which is theorizing about a set of specific economic activities, production, exchange, distribution, money lending, which stood out in sharp relief and required not only a description, but rationalization. Like it was inappropriate. It's wrong to even separate that out as a separate social system. So I think about myself as a consumer apart from my family, my friends, the well-being of other people, right? I calculate cost-benefit analysis for my own economic well-being apart from any of this other stuff. That's entirely new. Um, One of the most important consequences. Okay, so that I want to get straight. Things you just assume when you take an economics class. You have a very modern, mechanistic, materialistic, individualistic discipline that's assumed the first day of class. And it's not true to life and it's not healthy and it's driving us into the ground. Um, okay. The continuing illusion of unlimited growth. So that market economy model is that you keep growing and growing. So even Adam Smith thought the only way to grow the market is keep expanding all over the world and exploiting resources all over the world. And he didn't think we'd ever run out. But now we've run out. Right now we're hitting the wall and we have to figure out what to do next. The continuing illusion of unlimited growth on a finite planet. Okay, where did it go? This thing keeps disappearing. Um, okay, is this it? No. All right, let me see if I can find it. Okay. Um, all right, is a dilemma at the root of the major problems of our time. There's a clash between the linear reductionist thinking and this much more holistic thinking about the web of life. We are just part of the broader web of life. The financial instruments which lay at the heart of the credit crisis were actually designed by mathematicians and physicists who used computer models to reconstitute the unreliable loans in ways that were supposed to eliminate the risks. But they're wrong because they're not experts in human behavior. Human behavior can't be modeled mathematically. Luckily, right? People will donate to organizations not in their economic interest. People will um, make all sorts of sacrifices for their children, not in their economic interest. If it's in your personal interest to save money, not to give any money to your kids, not to have kids, as I've said before. And so, of course, this is not going to work. Not because people aren't rational, but because people are human. And the notion of rational is inhumane. Um, so Max Weber pointed that out, that this model is inhumane. But it carried with, it carried with it a set of values. So if you remember, I was talking about in the last lecture, the the rich people were trying to convince the public that freedom, is political freedom, economic freedom, freedom of speech, and you either have all of them or none of them. That was what they were trying to teach you, and it's not true. But it's an ideology, it's a set of beliefs, and the people who figured out this kind of worldview is emerging, they were worried about it because they knew right away this is not humane. Um, okay, this largely unconscious embrace of the mechanistic approach to management has become a major obstacle to organizational change. As we move into the 21st century, we have to get over the mechanistic view of organizations. It's necessary for the survival of human civilization, okay? And they're linked to the scientific, social, and cultural transformation that is now underway. So now we're going to take a closer look at those social systems, at the systems thinking view of how we need to think about social systems. So that was what you read today. That's the systems view of health, sorry. Um, I will get, first we do the systems view of social systems. Here we go. All right. So let's see, social systems. How should they run? They shouldn't be mechanistic. They're not machines. We aren't machines, and we shouldn't be thinking about ourselves at work as an extension of a machine. And we shouldn't be thinking of ourselves at work just as cost benefit analysis. Like it's the only reason I'm here. I'm going to try to act in my own self-interest. That's not true. So, what sort of systems do we live in? Well, we live in family systems, and each family system has its worldview, and it's transferred through conversations, not necessarily experience. People can have the same experiences, and their families will interpret those experiences in entirely different ways, right? It's scary how differently the worldviews we grow up are. Um, Somebody will say, "Oh," and I know this, my students tell me this, your mother got cancer. Oh, it must be God's will. I must be having my faith tested, or I must have done something wrong, or my mother must have done something wrong, and she's getting punished by God because she needs to turn to God, or God is testing her faith, or something like that, right? Somebody else will say, oh, they must have had a weak gene. I'm sure there's a genetic cause of this, and the doctors will have a cure, right? Um, and another person will say, what kind of cancer is this? I have a student who had his mother had ovarian cancer at a very young age, which was very strange. It turns out they lived on a military base that was very close to a toxic dump. And there were many people living in that area that did get weird cancers, got them early. The student myself had cerebral palsy. So, what's the cause? Somebody else will say, it's not God testing you. It's not a weak gene. It's that toxic dump, right? How come the corporations or the military didn't have to clean up their waste? How come these people we know are getting sick, are having children with defects, and still nobody's cleaning it up, right? Is that the government, or is that the capitalist economic system that greed just hides everything? Right? Or a combination of both. So that's where you get family systems that teach children to interpret events in their families in very, very different ways that have a profound effect on the overall culture, on what we demand of our politicians, of what we demand of our corporations, um, right? And of how we behave. But that's what I want to give you a sense that systems, we are creatures of culture. And these systems, starting with the family system, they aren't just there to raise our bodies, they're there to mold our character for virtue and vice, but you mold your character based on a understanding of the universe, the purpose of life, the meaning of life. So that's what's important. And if you reflect on it, it makes perfect sense. Each conversation creates thoughts and meaning and leads itself to more conversation. Each person plays a role. The system has boundaries and it generates itself, right? So grandparents, parents, and then you and you. My students have often talked about, well, what are my grandparents' worldview? And how do my parents did they internalize that or did they totally reject it? Or did they somehow use it to synthesize their own view. And where am I in that process? Um, Human communication. We coordinate not just our, all right, so that was Capra's reminding you of when he first introduced systems thinking and how he critiqued social systems according to the Enlightenment view and specifically the economic system. So this chapter on systems and social systems is just a closer look at what social systems should be. So now this is true of any organization. It could be the place where you work. It could be a church. It could be Lyon College is the example that I'm going to use. It could be your sports organization, the NAIA or whatever. It can be, if you think of almost everything you do, it's connected to a social system because we are creatures of culture. So the first step is family systems. And so this is interesting. When I moved to Arkansas, my students tell me what they learned in their family system, how their family systems work. And they would talk about their grandparents' worldview, which is usually their religion, but not always, their philosophy, and then their parents. And then I'm introducing them to a lot of different points of view, and they can see, were my parents Christian socialists or were they John Locke types? Or, you know, how did they fit into those older paradigms? Um, and it was interesting. And they're very different, and they're all pretty different than the one I would grow up in. So very rarely have I ever had a student who grew up in a family system with the worldview that I had. But I learned a lot. So I've been here almost 30 years and I learned a lot. But probably my main lesson is how much we are creatures of culture. So we're formed by social systems around us. Okay, so each conversation and the worldview really gets carried through conversations, not behaviors. So you can go to the same school, be on the same team. You can have a lot of the same behaviors as other people, but when you're home talking about the meaning of life or the struggle between good and evil or who's just and who's not or things like that, boy, incredible disagreements. Um, so each conversation creates thought and meaning, right? It's thinking, it's ideas and meanings, and it leads to more conversations. So each person plays a role, and the system has a boundary. So you say, well, this is our family system, what, our nuclear family, or is it that on my mom's side of the family, we have the same worldview, but not on my dad's? Just things like that. This is common sense. The system would have some boundaries. And then it tends to generate itself. So once you get into that system, it tends to just keep reinforcing itself. It's like a bubble. And so human communication is coordination of behavior. Children imitate the behavior of the people around them. And then as they get older, they absorb the concepts and meanings. All right. So it's analogous. It's similar to biological networks and different. So in biology, you have this constant process of evolution where you have genetic mutation, but the genes that mute are the ones that find a niche, find a way for that mutation to develop into a species. And that can only be in relation to the other species. So the overall process will lead to more and more complexity, more and more variety of life. Now, right now, we happen to be killing off species at an incredibly fast rate. So we don't know exactly what's coming and how nature will adapt. But in the social realm, we are also constantly creating new social networks. As we go through the green energy transition, there will be a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, both by green technology, but also green biology, people living simpler lives, and then living both simpler in terms of using fewer resources, but also more technological, the way the resources, like they'll have solar panels. So things like that are interesting because we will be doing both simultaneously. Um, so you can attach meaning to just about everything. So nothing is a given, no meanings are given, but some of them are definitely more true to the human condition and to humanity, to our place in the universe, to our proper relationship to each other. Like you can create a system that's racist, but it's a lie about our genetic, our physiological nature. There's no substantial difference based on race. And race itself is a socially defined category. There's nothing there in terms of genes or behaviors or any sort of stereotype. So we attach meanings to things, and some are better than others. We have to have meaning. We have to make sense of our outer world and our inner world. So we run into stuff and then we interpret it in a way. And then that creates our minds, our idea of the good, and then we communicate that. And then we just keep reinforcing it, or something happens that really causes us to question that inner dialogue of the soul with itself. And then that dialogue we've had with the people who agree with us. So there's this constant examination process that we all need to be engaged in pretty much all the time, but particularly when we live in a time of great change. So he talks about the inner world of reflective consciousness, and it has to involve form, matter, process, and meaning. So, so there's a network. For example, you have a system, a school system, public school system. Then you have the actual teaching and activities that go on in that system. Then you have to have the buildings, you have to have the equipment, the material components, and then you have to have the final cause, right? What is the purpose of all this stuff? Because education is really important. Public education. Well, why? And then you have to say, do you need kids to get educated for STEM? And they also need to get educated for virtue. They need to get educated for citizenship, because the society, in order to maintain itself, but also to adapt to change, how you educate, that you educate the next generation, and then how you educate them is really important. The concept of a four interdependent perspectives are similar to Aristotle's four causes. So I just want to point this out. When I keep talking about Aristotle, Mr. Capra actually realizes that the most recent trends in science actually have the same sort of basic foundations as the way that Aristotle looked at the natural world and also culture. Um, so evolution proceeds by repeating the patterns over and over. But also within that, even in evolution, there's novelty, there's new species emerge. And so the same in human culture. There we have this pattern of having children grow up in families and having a lot of habits and basic structure of the school system, basic structure of neighborhoods, all that sort of stuff. But then within that, we can emerge new forms or new ways of teaching, new subjects to teach. So there is novelty within it, within that process. Um, okay. Social networks are forms of communication involving symbolic language, cultural constraints, power relationships. And we need to use insights from all these disciplines. So philosophy is thinking about thinking. And so each of the disciplines focuses on a certain kind of thinking. So usually the first day or the first week of any class, you go, okay, this is the part of reality that this class is going to deal with for the rest of the semester. But in a philosophy class, this class is going to examine one set of assumptions, and then it will examine another one, and they won't agree. And I'm going to have to be changing my mind a lot, like blowing my imagination, rethinking my way of thinking. That's what this class is about. Okay, social rules can be broken, natural laws cannot. So nature functions on a much more predictable kind of order, even though it does have spontaneity. But human culture can change radically, and it can be self-destructive. And so human beings, the power of choice is real. They can choose to do all sorts of stupid things, but they always have a reason. So we have to look at our meanings, shared context of meaning. Okay, the material structures are always created for a purpose, a conscious purpose, right? So when someone decides to build a building, the way they're going to build it is completely dependent upon the purpose, the function, why there needs to be a building in the first place. So again, we're always trying to coordinate our inner world and our outer world. You know, a classic cat case for that I've run into is that somebody's mother gets cancer, right? I had a student whose mother got ovarian cancer at a very young age, and the doctors are really surprised. And she died eventually. Well, I have students who tell them, I don't think this student was told this, but other students, similar situations, that, oh, your mother must have done something wrong, and now she's getting punished by God, or your mother's being tested, her faith is being tested, or your whole family's faith is being tested, or some God is behind this in some way, and we have to figure it out, right? What did you do wrong? Or how can you come up stronger because of this? Well, somebody else will say, well, wait a second. Her son, my student, was also had cerebral palsy. And there were a lot of people living in that area that are getting cancer and that are having children with birth defects. So let's look for a scientific cause. Well, it turns out this was a location of a toxic waste dump, right? So I think that's the cause. It's not God, it's toxic waste. Okay, well, who's responsible for that, right? Is it corporations that created the waste that didn't report that it was destructive? Is it the military that hid? He lived on a military base. Is it the military that hid the information? Did they know the information? So it might not be the military's fault. It was the corporation's fault because the corporations knew there was this problem, but they didn't say anything, right? So it's not the military. This is the kind of stuff where in human culture, it's a lot more complicated, but people come up with meanings that are fundamentally different and they lead to fundamentally different behaviors, right? They really change your behavior. If you think the corporations are burying all this stuff and not testing it or telling people what they know, there should be a law against that. They should get sued. And what happened was corporations did bury a lot of poison stuff without knowing, supposedly. And so then we passed the Clean Air, Clean Water, environmental laws so that there were these cleanup sites. The government paid to clean the stuff up because the corporations claimed they were not guilty because they didn't know. So you couldn't sue them. All right, but after you find out, then if once they know, then they're guilty if they keep burying this toxic waste. But that's sort of how environmental laws became emerged in our legal system. So right now, Mr. Trump's one of his goals is to eliminate all environmental laws. Well, that's on paper. I have a hard time believing it would actually happen because I don't think people even know how awful our lives would be if we eliminated all of them. And also, there are a lot of them at this point. So, but that's an example of how social systems are much more fluid, can be, laws can be made or broken, and then people can change their attitudes pretty quickly. And it's all a lot more precarious, but that is why education is so important because you need citizens who actually can make good judgments about that. All right. Some of our actions are involuntary and some are voluntary. We interact with the environment. Anthropological definition of meaning is an integrated system of socially acquired values, beliefs, and rules of conduct. All right, and then my claim is this, some of those systems are actually better than others because they fit with our place in the universe or with human nature. But it's definitely true that there are these constant feedback loops. Those are norms, you will be rewarded or punished or honored or dishonored or socially ostracized or socially accepted, according to if you've adapted the dominant belief. Actions of individuals are constrained by culture. There's a shared body of knowledge, hopefully. I mean, on this particular issue of sustainability, we still don't have a shared body of knowledge because the climate scientists are not being listened to, and other people are presenting their views as if it just is legitimate. So it's a problem. But our identities get embedded in a way of life, in identifying with a certain church or a certain social group, certain social class, certain neighborhood, whatever. But they are mental boundaries. The origin of power is inequality, right? People are unequal in their talents, in their opportunities. They shouldn't be unequal in their opportunities, but in their expertise. Somebody's the expert, somebody depends upon what the expert knows. Some of it is coercive. You force people to obey. Some of it is you provide incentives for a carbon tax. If you pollute, you have to pay a tax. Oh, I'm not forcing you. I'm just going to tax you. And then you have to decide what you want to do, pay the tax or change. Um, the best thing would be that people want to go green rather than they have to be coerced or they have to be compensated. Um, the art of politics is to balance all these things. Um, individuals and groups want to advance their own interest. Um, well, yeah, especially when it comes to Locke and Bentham. People have their interests, but the idea in Locke and Bentham is as long as I don't hurt anybody else, I can do whatever I want. But the trouble is, everything we do at this point affects everybody else and affects future generation. Um, so how do we figure out how to come together on this one issue? Um, sometimes we want to advance our own interests for power or glory, and economic structures can be based on domination because economic power is a lot of power. If you don't do what I say, you get fired. Or if you don't follow the norms, you won't get a decent paying job. So that's pretty pretty threatening, pretty difficult to step outside of the norm. But there's different kinds of power. The best kind of power is to empower other people. So to convince people to go green and then to provide opportunities for jobs or uh, getting solar panels in a way that will save them money or other ways of empowering people. So a network society, organizational structures have rules of behavior that facilitate decision-making and embody relationships of power. There's formal and informal ones. Okay, technology is formal, right? Tools, rules, and procedures through which scientific knowledge is applied. So these are, you can communicate technological knowledge and you can use it to build things and you can pass it on, but it's very detached. It doesn't talk about emotional context or relationship context, or right now, um, the business environment runs by a mechanistic model. People, you learn it in economics 101, the first day of class, or right in the first chapter of the book. Um, and it's top down machine. A company is like a machine, but this is not very adaptable. Like the books don't necessarily talk about the transition, having to integrate, having an informal network as well as a formal network. The legal entity of an organization versus there's at one level, it's distribution of power. That's the formal patterns, organizational charts, right? So Lion has a president, a provost, academic, the dean of the faculty is the provost. There's the dean of students. There's a whole map. But the informal networks are important, and those are communities. Within every organization, there's interconnected communities of practice, informal networks. So, so I just need to take Lion because I've been there for almost 30 years. And Lion has a mission, liberal arts education. So the first day of class, we had the outline evidence liberal arts needs. And we had why liberal arts, why our founders and people throughout American history have been founding these small liberal arts schools, is that they wanted a broad-based public to get that kind of education so that they could lead, they could educate others, They could educate the future teachers of younger students, but their teachers would have been liberally educated, so it'll trickle down. And so that you're educating for citizenship as well as just for knowledge. And so you can maintain your democracy because you can be self-controlled, but you can spot politicians that are corrupt or honest. You can distinguish between political language that is manipulative, political language that is educational. So, um, so every organization has its informal networks, and this would be social networks. So at Lion, we have what's called Honor Day. And so we honor people who go over and above their job description. They don't just come in, fulfill their role, and leave. They creatively think of other ways to bring people together. They contribute to the climate, the community at Lion. Now, I'm sure that you've had teachers or staff members or administrators who go out of their way for you, and they just are part of creating the climate. There also could be some that are indifferent, they're detached, and there could be some that are kind of hostile. And that makes a whole lot of difference in the climate at Lion. Okay, so Lion has a certain power structure, right? Organizational chart. But within that, the people who run each role really create a community, a climate. And I've been at Lion when there were how many different provosts, people, bosses I had. Oh my gosh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 or 8 different bosses. And it makes a difference. They set a tone for the college. They always report at the faculty assembly. So they establish some kind of relationship with the faculty, and it matters. um, some have done a better job than others at that. The more we understand life, now this is his critique of the mechanistic view of organizations, the more painfully we notice. So if we know that life is like this, it has informal structures, people need each other, we're social beings, and we get satisfaction out of life by working at an organization that has a meaningful mission, that's structured appropriately, and that allows for all this interaction, building a community, emergent creativity. People can suggest things, they can go out of their way. They're encouraged to keep improving the structure and the activities. Okay, the more we understand that, the more we notice more painfully we notice the life-draining nature of our current economic system. When shareholders and other outside bodies assess the health of a business, they ask about profits, shareholder value, market share, and economic parameters that are inhuman and inhumane. It's hard to hold on to the vision of an organization that is alive, created, and concerned about well-being when they're forced into these categories that are impersonal and that only are concerned with shareholder value. Are the rich people who own the shares getting richer or not? If not, you failed. So we need a paradigm shift. Um, most relationships between organisms and nature are cooperative, and we need to shift to that cooperative model. So we need a new order because the old order is now leading to instability, right? We have income inequality and we have environmental catastrophe. So it's dated. We got to get out of it. We need to find a new way. Our current economic system is life-threatening and life-draining. The outside shareholders consider the health of the organization as profits, shareholder value, versus how alive the community is. In the long run, organizations that are truly alive will be able to flourish only when we change our economic system so that it becomes life-enhancing rather than life-destroying and integrated into us in a sustainable way. So, for example, most of you are going into healthcare. So are you going to find an organization to work for that's interested in thinking about systems thinking and overall health? Is the organization going to try to go green as much as possible? Do they want to encourage the employers to be aware of their sugar intake, just understanding this whole setting a good example and then telling the clients, I can fix your knee, but, this is your knee problem is tied to a whole lot of other cultural issues. Like you're too heavy and that's part of why your knees are falling apart. So here's how to work on your weight. Here's how to do exercises that not only strengthen your knee, but also we have these other exercises. And you can get into communities with other people to have your exercise class. And you can talk to each other about, you can read these books, The Hacking the American Mind. You can read books with somebody else, become informed. You can talk about toxic culture. You can talk to each other about how, yeah, I understand this stress. And just reading it, understanding it, getting into a group of people that will talk about it relieves the stress. How do you create a life where you won't be as physically unhealthy or spiritually, emotionally? And the company itself should be designed more like that. It should be dedicated to changing healthcare in a way that's heads towards systems thinking and sustainability. And so healthcare is the next thing we're going to talk about. So here he has a whole chapter on healthcare. And all right, there's two parallel systems in healthcare, and this shouldn't be too surprising because I keep harping on it, but it is amazing that the books keep saying the same thing. The biomedical approach, the Enlightenment approach, is more and more efficient in its own parameters, which is computer-assisted diagnosis. It's top-down machine pharmacology, minimally intrusive surgical techniques. That's good. I have an artificial hip, and it was done by lasers, and it has a porcelain, whatever, hip. And my mother had an artificial hip, and it was major surgery, and it was metal. So, yeah, I mean, that's gotten better. But why is it we need artificial hips in the first place? Is it because, for me, it was because I jogged for 42 years. And I guess, there has to be some ramifications of that. But for a lot of people, an artificial hip is because of weight or maybe their jobs require lifting or something else. So whatever it is that you could avoid, prevent, you need to talk about that. But the biomedical approach doesn't go there. It just says this person has this sickness, so here's the therapy, here's the surgery, here's the drugs. And nobody's necessarily getting any better, and health is not improving. If you take a systemic and integrative vision of health and healing, that's outside of the official system, you want an integrated medicine. And there are more clinics that do integrative medicine. Yeah, because right now we have this problem. Our health isn't improving, it's more expensive, and this is a global problem. So the biomedical model is based on Descartes. It splits mind and body. You never ask why the illness occurred and remove the conditions that led to the illness. Instead, you just understand the mechanisms through which the disease operates and you try to interfere with that, right? Give them a drug to change their body chemistry. Well, how did the chemistry get that way in the first place? Um, Systems, you examine the whole person, body and mind, interactions with the natural and social environment, how to prevent dysfunctional interactions and how to heal, not based on mechanism. The standard model is you focus on smaller and smaller parts of the body, organs, cells, molecules, and genes. The Human Genome Project, the claim was if we can map the whole gene, we can solve all diseases. But that's not true because disease isn't caused by linear causal chains of genetic determinism, right? So many diseases are not caused just by the genes. Okay, where did we go? Oh, geez. I think it flipped to a different, I'm sorry, I think it just flipped to a different, to the attachment I just had. Okay. It's not caused by genes. It's caused by a combination of a genetic capacity, maybe even a genetic tendency, but it's the culture that causes a gene to activate. Okay, so the number of disorders that literally have only a genetic cause is only 2%. So the Human Genome Project was spent a lot of money and promised that they would be able to end cancer, alcoholism, and criminality. Well, it didn't because those things are caused by cultural situations and people being depressed or people wanting to escape their situation or people being desperately poor or, all these other social factors. But the biotech companies still try to sell it, keep the illusion alive because they make money off of it and they want investors. Okay, I don't know why this keeps flipping, but okay. What is health? What is health? Biomedical ethic systems. Okay, I did that. Definition of health is a state of well-being resulting from a dynamic balance that involves physical and psychological aspects of the organism, as well as its interaction with its natural and social environment. Body and mind are integrated. Every illness has mental aspects, often unconscious. Mental attitudes and psychological techniques are important for healing illness. Placebo effect. People are given a sugar pill, but told that it will, this is intended to cure you of your depression, and it works, right? They get better just because they believe it will work. On the other hand, if you give people a pill, this is likely to make you feel bad. People's anxiety increases way beyond what the pill itself would cause. It's a sugar pill. And so mentally, a lot of our sicknesses are mental. They're based on expectations. They're based on our fears if we're in stressful situations. So then there's a mesolimbic dopaminergic system. This is dopamine. That's what we've talked about with hacking the American mind. It's activated when people expect to get better. They have like a dopamine rush. Okay, on the other hand, the experience of going to the hospital might convince them they're going to get better, or they might be afraid. And then their health will change according to their expectations. So there's a supporting role of genes, but also the serotonin is linked to placebo-induced anxiety relief. So Mr. Lutzig in Hacking talked about serotonin as the long-term drug that enables people to have long-term goals and to care about happiness, not pleasure. So the genes could help with that, but it also helps. He tells you diet, what you should eat to keep serotonin in your system so that that can work with your genes and strengthen your long-term ability to act on long-term goals and not become unstable, just stay focused. Okay, expectation is important in your athletic performance. Illness is an imbalance. Again, that goes back to Aristotle. Chronic stress plays a role in the origin and development of most illnesses. So yeah, the Mr. Lutzig also talked about that imbalances of dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, especially dopamine and serotonin. He says you have to balance those out, and our systems are designed to exploit them. You have to find ways to release stress. Some of the times people do it by getting sick, and that might be conscious or not. If a stress situation persists, there's a pill, but then it will be replaced by mental illness or asocial behavior. I mean, the stress is the problem, and a pill can't fix it. So psychological counseling, psychotherapy, helps you introspect and control the situation with your mind and with your deliberate choice to change your environment. So what about healing? Every organism is capable of self-healing. It has an innate tendency to reestablish itself in a balanced state when it's been disturbed. So the issue here with the green energy transition is that a lot of people are trying to find that, that space where they feel comfortable again and they can heal. But the trouble is, and then their comfort foods are bad foods, or their comfortable way of life is a high carbon way of life. And so then what they need to do to limit overall stress and minimize climate catastrophes, which of course will cause a lot of stress, but what they need to do is to realize that. And instead, there's a lot of people who are threatened by somebody telling them they should get an electric vehicle, or they should get airtight windows, or they should get solar panel, and we'll give you a tax break. Well, but that's too disruptive. And so your generation, you just have to train yourself that, yeah, I want to do that because that will make me less stressed in the future. All right, so sleep, food, exercise, drugs. Economic and political forces make it hard to get well or to stay healthy. 3/4 of our healthcare spending is lifestyle related. That's terrible. It's probably getting worse too. Diabetes, obesity, heart problems, muscle pains, abdominal pains, depression, Alzheimer's. They have no physical cause. So much for the Human Genome Project. You need more time with your physician to work on lifestyle changes. And this is where all of you who are in healthcare, some kind of healthcare, could re-envision yourself as a healthcare provider. Um, all right, and perhaps the organization you work for has already been informed about this, but perhaps, you can bring in and say, okay, um, I took a class and I had conversations with people, and there is a broader vision, and our clinic could probably get a better reputation of keeping people healthy if we provide this broader service. Um, we need legislation, we need corporate responsibility. And the recommendations of Mr. Capra restrict advertising of unhealthy products. How likely is that? But it's costing us so much money, our national debt, health taxes on individuals and corporations that generate health hazards, social policies so people are not living in poverty and so stressed out, nutritional policies so there are incentives to produce more nutritious food and not processed, not having a lot of unnecessary chemicals. Um, so social health and ecological health are interconnected, and integrative therapy is you work with a patient to change their way of life, not just to solve their particular problem of the day. You need wisdom, concern for the patient. You want to heal the whole person. Um, Hospitals need to be more humane, include family members, comfortable environments. And you need to use drugs only in emergencies. Drugs are not going to solve anything. You need to reorganize medical education. Um, and you need sustainable agriculture, healthier foods being grown in the farms, um, with fertilizer that doesn't poison the earth or the streams. It's just step by step, there's a lot of things we need to do. So in your post, I would like you to brainstorm perhaps what kind of a healthcare provider you would like to be, or if you're not going into healthcare, um, how do you envision um, keeping yourself healthy? You really do need to start envisioning it. Nobody told me this, but I did sort of do it when I was 40 because I thought, geez, I want to live a long time and I want to stay healthy. I don't want to rot in a nursing home somewhere. Um, so far that's worked out pretty well, but I have to go at it, exercise every day and not eat sugar and not eat too many calories. But personally, I need to work more on social engagement, and that's kind of my thing at the moment. But each of you should ask the right questions and have the right model of health for your life, and you're much more likely to get there. I don't think you're going to get there unless you re-envision it. It's not going to happen by accident. And you can be a change agent. You can be at the forefront of this change with our healthcare system that absolutely has to happen. All right, so that's the lecture for today.